Whatever can be conceived as not existing does not involve existence in its essence. Spinoza, Ethics Part 1, Axiom 7. In Spinoza's philosophy, only the substance, God or nature, is considered to exist necessarily and essentially. Substance has existence intrinsically bound to its essence, making it impossible even to imagine it as not existing. Thus, substance must exist unconditionally and necessarily. In contrast, modes or particular entities can easily be imagined as not existing. Their essence does not entail necessary existence, so they exist only contingently. Attributes, too, while serving to express the essence of substance, cannot be independent bearers of necessity apart from substance. Only substance exists by the necessity of its own nature, while both attributes and modes depend on substance and can easily be conceived as not existing. This distinction is central to Spinoza's ontology, precisely articulating the philosophical status of substance as opposed to other forms of being, attributes or modes. The distinction between substance and modes in Spinoza offers important insights for both our daily lives and our understanding of complex systems. Above all, distinguishing between necessity and contingency allows us to view personal and social phenomena with greater flexibility. When we realize that only substance, nature or God, forms an absolutely necessary foundation, and that all the particular institutions, relationships, organizations, and technologies we experience are contingent existences, we are less likely to regard society, customs, or systems as absolute. This means that schools, families, workplaces, and even nations can change according to historical and contextual circumstances. Such recognition opens our eyes to a more flexible, critical perspective on the world. Complex systems are assemblages where diverse elements interact to create unpredictable outcomes. In such a world, each component, people, institutions, technologies, and so on, can change at any time, and there is no need for them to exist in just their present form. Spinoza's concept of contingent existence helps us understand the openness and capacity for change inherent in complex systems. Our own lives are similar. When we appreciate that the elements in our world are contingent, not necessary, we become more adaptive and resilient. Furthermore, by imagining that something does not have to exist, we develop a critical attitude toward social phenomena, institutions, and customs. Recognizing that traditional educational systems, organizational structures, and social roles need not be as they currently are empowers us to experiment with alternative orders and new approaches. Innovation and transformation often stem from this recognition of contingency. Many areas of our lives are filled with uncertainty, variability, and unpredictability. Spinoza's distinctions remind us that the only unshakable foundation is nature, substance, itself. Everything else can change, and the knowledge that things can be changed gives us the strength to live more creatively and serenely in an uncertain world. In other words, Spinoza's philosophy guides us toward flexibility, critical thinking, and openness to possibility amidst the complexity and flux of reality. Yet, in another sense, life continually presents us with experiences where, before an event occurs, countless possibilities, or contingencies, are open to us, but once the event happens, the intricate chain of causes can be retrospectively seen as necessary. The world prior to an occurrence is a state where many possibilities coexist. At this stage, a variety of causal pathways are available, and it is impossible to predict exactly what will happen. Here, contingency means unpredictability and the openness of possibility, a world where freedom and potential coexist. After the event transpires, however, we can retrospectively trace the web of causes that led to it, even if, in practice, this is sometimes impossible due to immense complexity. It is in principle feasible. Despite the many variables and interactions, once something has happened, we can identify, in sequence, the causal links: A led to B, B led to C, and so on. Thus, we often conclude in hindsight, it could not have been otherwise, which is called retrospective necessity or a deterministic interpretation of outcomes. Spinoza himself, indeed, argues that if an event has occurred, it must have necessarily occurred within the laws and structure of nature, substance, and attributes. This is reflected in the perspective of complexity science as well. Systems such as societies, the climate, or living organisms develop certain patterns or outcomes through myriad interacting factors. Although these causal relationships are too intricate to trace prospectively, so that before the fact, outcomes seem contingent and uncertain, in retrospect, we can appreciate that the combined actions of all these causes led to the observed result. Tools like recurrence quantification analysis, RQA, in complexity science are used to analyze just such processes, structuring data to unveil how one possibility is realized out of many, and making sense of the hidden, intricate causal fabric that lies behind the outcome. Ultimately, before an event happens, many pathways and possibilities are open. This is contingency. Once one pathway is realized, even if through immense complexity, it becomes necessity. That is, the realized event is, in effect, causally necessary, while, beforehand, many potentialities and contingencies existed. The crucial point is that necessity and contingency can shift depending on perspective and time. This is a key interpretive insight in both Spinoza's ontology and complexity science. To further clarify what Spinoza means by necessity and how modern complexity theory, particularly recurrence quantification analysis, RQA, understands determinism, as well as how necessity is articulated within Spinoza's substance-attribute-mode triad. For Spinoza, necessity means that substance, God or nature, exists by virtue of its own essence. Non-existence is logically impossible. From this necessary existence, attributes and modes directly or necessarily flow, regulated without contingency. For example, attributes, notably extension and thought, are ways in which substance expresses its essence, while modes, individuals, objects, events, thoughts, etc., are specific manifestations of these attributes. The crucial point is that only substance exists necessarily, while particular things, modes, ensue from substance's essence and structure but are not themselves necessary. Nevertheless, the manner of a mode's existence is itself necessary given the connection to substance. In other words, nature, God, must inevitably express itself in various ways. This is Spinoza's so-called determinism of nature. Decisionism in complexity science and RQA, on the other hand, focuses on analyzing repeated patterns, their predictability, and the structural necessity in systems as they evolve over time. For example, the more regular the patterns in heartbeats, brainwaves, or social actions, i.e., the higher the determinism in RQA, the more the system operates according to particular logics and laws. In other words, true randomness is less prevalent, deterministic patterns predominate, something that can be measured. Contrasting Spinoza's determinism with that in complexity theory, Spinoza holds that only the fundamental substance, God, nature, necessarily exists. Its consequences, attributes, are necessary, while individual modes exist contingently but are at the same time necessitated in their characteristics by substance's logic. In complexity theory, the focus is not on randomness but rather on the prevalence of repeating patterns, suggesting internal laws structuring the system, though there always remains a space for randomness and emergence. Full one-to-one predictability is never presumed. Within the substance attribute mode structure, substance is necessity itself, attributes denote how substance unfolds its essence, modes are the concrete phenomena arising under the laws of substance and attributes. In an analogy with complexity theory and RQA, substance's necessity is like the existential condition of a system, attributes like its fundamental rules, and modes like the endless diverse patterns and realizations made possible under those rules. Spinoza necessity is therefore ontological and logical, while determinism in complexity theory is more about patterns and structure. Both perspectives converge in holding that the world is not just a sum of random events but is governed by law and order. The difference is that Spinoza is concerned with the logical ground of existence, whereas complexity science analyzes empirical phenomena and quantifies laws through concrete repetitions and patterns. Peter was a researcher who believed that all the phenomena of the world were the products of contingency and ever-changing variables. He lived under the vague presumption that everything, nature, society, relationships, and thoughts, were thrown together without any underlying order, and saw himself as swept along in the river of chance. But one day, observing repeated patterns and subtle order in the midst of chaos, he began to wonder, could there be an invisible necessity or underlying structure behind all this flux? That doubt naturally led him to the philosophy of Spinoza. Peter came into contact with Spinoza's ontology, which asserts that only substance, God or nature, exists necessarily, as well as with complexity theory and tools such as recurrence quantification analysis, RQA. Immersed in these new ways of thinking, he encountered the strange world of necessity and determinism. Peter noted Spinoza's view that specific phenomena, modes, are necessarily generated from the essential structure, attributes, of substance, nature. Simultaneously, from complexity science and RQA, he saw that even in seemingly random phenomena, repetitive structures, deterministic patterns, could be empirically confirmed. Yet he also gradually realized that, for individual events and changes, Fundamental contingency persists, single events remain hard to predict and cannot be explained as simply as they first appear. Moving between these two perspectives, Peter perceived that although the world's myriad phenomena might appear contingent on the surface, there is always a deep running order and structure, namely, the necessity of substance, pervading beneath. RQA's concept of determinism further reinforced the realization that the world is not pure randomness, but operates atop structural recurrence. The more Peter analyzed real data and cases, the more profoundly he experienced the interweaving of repetition and emergence, deterministic structure and contingent events. Absolute prediction was impossible, but he gradually came to find beauty in change, diversity, and the very movements that occur atop underlying structures. At the end of his journey, Peter was equipped with a wholly new perspective on the world. The necessity of substance and the predictable structures uncovered by complexity analysis converged. The world was neither mere randomness nor pure order, but a rich field of creative diversity structured by underlying order. Peter began to embrace his own life and humanity itself with deeper and more nuanced understanding. In this way, Spinoza's ontological necessity and the deterministic patterns of complexity science together chart a journey of intellectual growth, showing how a person seeking order and meaning can come to recognize a broader truth in the interplay of chance and necessity, change and law, within the world.